You should see these disturbing historical photos. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most? In January 1976, Karantina was a poor Beirut quarter filled with Palestinian refugees, Kurds, Syrians, and Lebanese workers. This photo shows families running through smoke as the district was emptied, with about 1,500 people reported lost. On May 4, 1945, American soldiers paused in Berchtesgaden beside a mural honoring Germany's World War I past. The striking part is that this quiet alpine town sat near the regime's mountain retreat, while another German defeat was only days away. In 1909, Empress Dowager Cixi's funeral moved through Beijing after she had ruled China from behind the throne for almost 50 years. This grand procession became one of the last great imperial sites of the Qing dynasty, which would fall only 3 years later. On August 23, 1945, Jan Moore kissed her fiancé, Ralph Neppel, after President Harry S. Truman gave him the Medal of Honor. Neppel had kept leading his men in Germany after a severe injury, making this quiet wheelchair moment one of the strongest homecoming images of the war. In June 1944, Finnish soldiers held the Vamelsu-Taipale line during a massive Soviet push toward Vyborg. Inside this narrow wooden shelter, their faces show the tense wait before one of Finland's most important defensive battles. On June 16, 1944, American B-24 Liberators flew over Bratislava during a major air raid on oil and transport targets. The photo caught the moment flak clouds filled the sky, turning the mission into a dangerous maze above the city. In 1994, a Yemeni government soldier stood on armored gear beside a large portrait of President Ali Abdullah Saleh. Just 4 years after North and South Yemen became one state, this short conflict decided whether the Union would survive. In 1899, Jaffa was a busy Ottoman port, where Jewish, Arab, and European families lived beside the sea. This rare wedding photo shows a whole community gathered years before Tel Aviv was founded nearby. Frank Switka was only 21 when his Sherman crew landed at Omaha Beach one day after the Normandy landings. 9 days later, near Couvin, his crew was lost during a forward spotting mission, and his name is honored at the Normandy American Cemetery. In 1969, Mission Control in Houston celebrated after Apollo 11 safely ended its historic moon mission. The sign saying "Task Accomplished" marked the moment Earth knew humans had walked on another world and come home. Jeff Davis entered sideshows around 1920, known for climbing skill and animal-themed costumes. Very little was recorded about his life, making this photo one of the few clear traces he left behind. This famous Hiroshima image may not show the first cloud at all, but a huge smoke column photographed hours later. Experts say the real cloud had likely faded by then, while fires across the wooden city formed the scene history kept repeating. In September 1942, German forces pushed deep into the Caucasus, trying to reach the Soviet oil fields that powered the war. This valley photo shows how far the campaign stretched before mountains, distance, and resistance turned the advance into a trap. Ted Kaczynski built this tiny Montana cabin in 1971, and it was later moved whole into Federal Bureau of Investigation storage. Its plain wooden walls became one of America's strangest evidence rooms, preserved far from the forest where he once lived. In July 1936, this family posed inside Madrid's Montaña barracks just after Republican workers took control of the site. The little girl holding a small sidearm makes the image feel unreal, but it marked the day Madrid stayed out of Franco's hands. The rusted tanks in Bhopal are tied to the night of December 2, 1984, when gas escaped from the Union Carbide plant while nearby families slept. More than 500,000 people were exposed, and the empty site still looks like a frozen warning from the industrial age. Kim Bu-gui, a Korean man known for his extreme height, drew huge crowds at a health event in Seoul in 1930. Standing about 2.3 meters tall, he later visited Japan and reportedly wanted to meet Robert Wadlow, the tallest man in the world. A suffrage campaigner once followed a young British politician and rang a large bell every time he tried to speak. Her loud protest turned a formal street speech into a public lesson. Women could be ignored, but not silenced. In February 1942, Japan's 15th Independent Engineer Regiment celebrated at Empire Dock after Singapore fell to their forces. The city had been called a fortress, yet its fall became one of Britain's biggest defeats in Asia. In 1933, a migrant strawberry picker in Louisiana sat inside his tent with a guitar after long field work. The photo shows how music could turn a rough camp into a small piece of home during the Great Depression. In September 1945, Japanese naval personnel at Onomichi Kurihara Naval Base listened as commanders explained the surrender terms. Their faces show the quiet moment when years of imperial certainty ended on home soil. In 1910, Berlin, this multi-floor horse hotel worked like a parking garage before cars took over the streets. Hundreds of transport horses could rest on upper levels, showing how modern city logistics once ran on hooves. Zani Zenobia was a young African-American sideshow performer, remembered for her rare hand features and the only known photo of her. She was adopted by performer Hannah Battersby's family, leaving a small but touching trace of a life mostly hidden from history. In October 1954, Detroit mother Dorothy Langore introduced newborn Douglas to his 8 older brothers at home. The boys lined up like a tiny welcoming committee, turning one baby's arrival into a rare family portrait of 9 sons. During the 1940s in occupied France, this Peugeot 202 carried large gas tanks on its roof because petrol was heavily rationed. It looks strange, but these bulky conversions kept taxis and private cars moving when normal fuel almost disappeared. At a Japanese air show in 1920, a Norman Thompson flying boat lost control in front of a packed crowd. The photo freezes the split second when early aviation still looked like magic, but could turn into disaster almost instantly. Hiru Onoda stayed hidden on Lubang Island for 29 years, believing every surrender notice was a trick. He finally came out in 1974, only after his former commander arrived in person and officially released him from duty. The SS Atlantis was a concrete ship built when steel was scarce and later grounded near Cape May after a storm in 1926. In this beach photo, it still looks like a strange sea monument before the Atlantic slowly began to hide it. This image does not show a child at a loom. It shows the SS Atlantis, a concrete ship grounded near Cape May after a storm in 1926. Behind the smiling women is a strange piece of steel saving engineering, slowly being taken back by the Atlantic. This 1960 funeral photo in Havana was cropped from a wider frame and became one of the most reproduced portraits of the 20th century. The intense stare lasted only a moment, but later appeared on posters, shirts, murals, and history books worldwide. In 1988, a United States Chinook lifted an abandoned Soviet-made Milmi 24 Hind from the desert of Chad. The secret mission was so bold that the helicopter was carried out at night, giving America a rare prize from the Toyota War, Operation Meeting House over Tokyo. In March 1945, became one of the most destructive air raids ever recorded. From above, the city looked like a map of fire, with central districts changed forever in a single night. 2 Austro-Hungarian soldiers sit in a muddy position using captured Italian equipment, including a rare Villa Perosa automatic weapon. The photo shows how soldiers often fought with whatever gear they could seize, turning the trench into a workshop of survival. Before the Normandy landings, General Dwight Eisenhower carried the weight of deciding when thousands of ships and planes would move. Reports say he pushed through the pressure with endless coffee, heavy smoking, and almost no sleep before giving the final order. In July 1863, soldiers ferried men and heavy field guns across the Potomac River on rafted blanket boats. The scene looks improvised, but this floating platform shows how armies moved huge equipment with whatever engineering they could build fast. In 1962, Italy, a United States First Lady and her sister were photographed in a rare, relaxed moment, far from official ceremony. The image feels striking because it shows two women, usually surrounded by power, sitting barefoot like ordinary travelers in the sun. In 1961, United States and Soviet tanks faced each other at Checkpoint Charlie during one of Berlin's most tense Cold War moments. For 16 hours, one street crossing became the sharpest line between two superpowers. On November 11, 1918, Wall Street filled with crowds after news arrived that the First World War fighting had ended. The financial heart of America turned into a street of relief, flags, and noise after 4 years of global crisis. This rare photo is believed to show one of the mobile vans used by German units in occupied Belarus around 1941. For decades, almost no clear images of these vehicles were known, making this a chilling piece of hidden evidence. During Operation Oregon in Vietnam, a reconnaissance platoon stepped out of a Huey helicopter onto rough hills west of Duc Pho. The photo captures the exact moment air mobility changed jungle fighting, dropping small teams into places roads could not reach. This photo is not the Paris World Fair pavilions. It shows soldiers posing on a massive railway gun, a weapon so large it needed its own train carriage. The scene feels almost unreal because the men look tiny beside the barrel, showing the strange scale of industrial warfare. This 1851 photo shows Sutter's Mill, where James Marshall found gold 3 years earlier and sparked the California gold rush. The small wooden mill became one of the most famous starting points of America's rush west. In 1905, Tsar Nicholas II was photographed in Tsarskoye Selo Park, beside one of the royal elephants kept there. The scene feels almost unreal because it shows the ruler of the Russian Empire in a quiet, private moment, far from palaces, crowds, and politics. In 1958, a Soviet magazine printed this control room photo with a detailed power diagram visible on the wall. According to Cold War stories, foreign analysts studied that single image to map part of the Ural energy network from open sources alone. In 1969, Hawaii's Kilauea volcano produced lava fountains so high they looked like a glowing wall rising from the ground. The cars beside the flow show the scale, turning a roadside scene into one of the most unreal volcano photos ever taken. In 1957, weightlifter Paul Anderson reportedly lifted 2,840 kilograms from supports in Toccoa, Georgia. The huge wheels make the scene look almost staged, but Anderson was one of the strongest men ever recorded in modern strength history. Hector the Rat became France's first space animal in 1961, riding a Veronique rocket for a high-altitude science mission. The tiny suit looks almost unreal, but it helped France collect early data on how living bodies reacted to spaceflight. In 1963, Disneyland still sat beside open land, with a parking lot almost as striking as the park itself. The photo shows early Anaheim before hotels, highways, and city growth completely surrounded Walt Disney's new idea. Around 1895 to 1900, fishermen near the Dalles, Oregon, pulled giant sturgeon from the Columbia River and hung them like trophies. Their size shows how rich the river once was before dams and heavy fishing changed it forever. In 1986, Aeroflot Flight 6502 became infamous after the captain tried to land with the cockpit view blocked during a reckless bet. The case is still studied as one of aviation's strangest human error events because a passenger flight was treated like a test of pride. Eamon Goeth lived above the Plaszow camp near Krakow, the same commandant later portrayed in Schindler's List. The photo feels chilling because it looks like an ordinary balcony scene, yet it overlooked one of wartime Poland's most feared places. In 1933, Adolf Hitler staged the first shovel ceremony for a new motorway section, turning road building into a huge public symbol. The striking truth is that Germany already had motorway plans before him, but his regime turned the Autobahn into one of its most powerful propaganda images. In 1966, This Yale rugby photo shows a rough campus match, long before one player entered national politics. The strange contrast is that a future United States president is seen here in a messy tackle, not a formal suit. In 1920, Eugene Victor Debs ran for president while serving time in federal prison, and his campaign used postcards showing him in uniform. He still received almost 1 million votes, making this one of the strangest campaign images in American election history. Ella Grigsby, known on stage as Madame Obama, was advertised in the late 19th century as one of the tallest women in the world. At about 6 feet 10 inches, her towering stage image made her a major attraction, while much of her real private life stayed in the shadows. In 1909, Russian writer Alexander Kuprin posed in balaclava wearing a heavy diving suit before going below the surface. The photo feels strange because it shows a famous author stepping out of literature and into one of the boldest technologies of his time. In 1966, Chris Noel visited troops in Vietnam as a singer, actress, and radio voice known for her California image. Her tours became famous because she kept returning to remote bases, even after surviving 2 helicopter incidents. In 1930, Dutch children practiced counting with large bead frames set on every desk. The classroom looked strict and quiet, but each child had a hands-on calculator long before electronic ones existed. In 1935, an Ethiopian Orthodox priest blessed men preparing to defend their country during the Italian invasion. The scene shows how faith, tradition, and national survival stood together before one of Africa's most famous resistance stories. In December 1944, Soviet artillerymen dragged a ZIS-3 field gun through freezing water to keep it moving with the front. The weapon was light, reliable, and produced in huge numbers, making it one of the Red Army's most important guns. In 1963, East Berlin still had wide empty lots where wartime ruins had been cleared but not rebuilt. The photo shows the long echo of the war, with a divided capital still looking unfinished in the Cold War years. In 1937, Vermont, this wooden snow roller packed snow down instead of removing it from rural roads. Before modern plows became common, these heavy rollers made winter roads smooth enough for sleighs, wagons, and early cars. In 1943, Arlington opened women's residences for thousands of young workers arriving for wartime government jobs. This simple room scene shows the private side of the war effort, where shared housing became part of America's new working life. During his campaign, John F. Kennedy went about 1,000 feet underground to speak directly with coal miners. The clean suit in the dark mine made the moment unforgettable, showing a future president face-to-face with one of America's toughest jobs. During the Burma campaign, Japanese troops used elephants to move supplies through jungle paths where trucks often could not pass. The photo shows an older kind of transport surviving inside modern war, with mahouts guiding animals through one of Asia's hardest fronts. In 1929, the Murchison earthquake split this New Zealand country road into deep cracks, while a car sat just beyond the damage. The broken road shows how the ground itself shifted, turning an ordinary rural lane into a visible scar across the landscape. In 1944, George Guckenberger of the 101st Airborne sat in a snowy foxhole during the siege of Bastogne. He was only 22, and this quiet winter photo became one of the last traces of his short service in Belgium. Polish friar Maximilian Kolbe was arrested after sheltering refugees and speaking against Nazi rule during the occupation. He later gave up his own place for another prisoner, making this plain portrait a quiet symbol of courage and faith. In 1913, this boy was only 4 years old and already selling newspapers on American streets. The photo became powerful because his small face showed a whole hidden world of children working long before modern protections. In 1922, a young Alfred Hitchcock worked on Number 13, his first directing project, but the film was never finished. This blurry street scene is rare because it shows the future master of suspense, before his famous style even existed. During the First World War, Adolf Hitler served as a message runner in Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment 16. This ordinary group photo became unsettling later because one quiet face in the crowd would become one of history's most infamous figures. Two women head through a muddy camp toward the Klondike goldfields, carrying supplies like thousands of fortune seekers in the late 1890s. The photo stands out because the gold rush was not only men with pans, but also women pushing into one of the harshest routes in North America. After the Austin Dam failed in 1911, water smashed through the Pennsylvania town and left houses folded into piles of timber. This photo shows how fast a modern engineering project could turn a quiet valley into a warning about unsafe dams. On June 15, 1991, Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines sent a giant ash cloud into the sky, one of the largest eruptions of the 20th century. The tiny motorcycle below shows the scale, a normal road suddenly facing a volcanic cloud big enough to affect the planet's climate. This ancient classroom in Iraq shows benches where students may have learned writing and numbers about 4,000 years ago. It is a rare reminder that teachers, lessons, and school routines already existed when many cities were still built from mud brick. During the First World War, German soldiers used arrows to send printed leaflets across the narrow space between trenches. It looks medieval, but it was a simple way to deliver messages when mud, wire, and danger made normal contact impossible. In 1937, workers at the SAF-3 factory in Reus assembled Polikarpov Bauer 15 fighters for Republican Spain. The smiling mechanic beside the landing wheel shows the hidden factory side of the Spanish Civil War, where aircraft were built far from the front. In 1944, circus clown Emmett Kelly was photographed trying to help during the Hartford Circus disaster. The image became haunting because the man famous for making crowds smile was caught in one of the saddest moments in circus history. During World War I, about 15,000 Russian soldiers waited in huge lines near Augustowo, Poland. The view turns one meal line into a map of captivity, showing how enormous the Eastern Front really became. Inside a British bomber turret, this airman sat surrounded by belts of ammunition, goggles, oxygen gear, and almost no space to move. The photo feels intense because it shows how modern air war placed one man inside a tiny metal bubble high above Europe. In the early 1960s, American families lined up in cars to receive the polio vaccine during huge public health drives. The scene shows how feared polio once was and how quickly people came when medicine offered a way to protect children. Harry Fowles was linked to the real Peaky Blinders, one of several young street groups in Birmingham during that era. The original group faded quickly, but its sharp name survived and became far more famous than most of its members. In 1857, Farrokh Khan Amin ol-Dowleh represented Persia in Europe, meeting the courts of Napoleon III and Queen Victoria. His portrait shows how Persian diplomacy entered the age of photography, turning a royal envoy into a sharp image of 19th century power. In the early 1900s, water carriers in Tiflis delivered drinking water by hauling heavy wooden barrels through the city streets. The photo shows how one man's back carried a service that later disappeared when modern pipes reached more homes. In 1941, German soldiers gathered beside a captured pillbox of the Kiev fortified area after heavy fighting around the city. The star, still visible on the wall, makes the photo feel frozen between two armies, with the bunker turned into a temporary field office. In the 1920s, garment workers cut and stitched clothing in crowded workshops, where long shifts and sharp machines were part of daily life. This photo shows the hidden labor behind fashion, with every coat beginning as careful handwork on a factory table. In February 1945, Allied air raids left central Dresden around Pirnischer Platz as open ruins with only streets and shells of buildings still visible. The haunting view shows a city once famous for art and Baroque beauty turned into one of the most debated urban scars of the war. On March 22, 1944, a B-17 Flying Fortress of the 384th Bomb Group released its payload over Berlin. The view came from another bomber's ball turret, one of the most exposed seats in the sky. In the 1920s, a millwright posed with a huge wooden wheel frame used in the hidden machinery of mills. Before factories became fully electric, craftsmen like him kept water, grain, and gear systems working with hand tools and exact skill. In September 1938, a coal miner in Bertha Hill, West Virginia, smiled at his baby outside a simple wooden home. The small family scene shows the human side of Great Depression coal country, where hard work and tenderness lived on the same porch. In the 1920s, draymen delivered heavy brewery barrels from horse carts, using wooden ramps and careful balance. A single slip could send the cask rolling, so this ordinary street job needed strength, timing, and trust. On June 1, 1942, a Japanese Ko-Hyoteki midget submarine was lifted from Sydney Harbor after a night operation near Allied ships. The scene shocked Australians because the war had reached one of their most famous harbors, not just distant battlefields. In the 1920s, huge typing pools like this kept banks, offices, and government departments moving before computers existed. The room shows how the typewriter opened office work to hundreds of thousands of women, turning rows of desks into the engine of modern paperwork. In 1932, huge crowds filled the new Sydney Harbor Bridge on opening day, turning the road into a sea of hats and smiling faces. The bridge opened during the Great Depression, making it more than an engineering wonder. It became a symbol of hope for Australia. In late 1945, Japanese communists marched in Tokyo only months after the end of the Second World War. The striking part is how fast public politics returned, as people carried banners in streets that had recently been under strict wartime control. In late 1945, Japanese communists marched in Tokyo only months after the end of the Second World War. The striking part is how fast public politics returned, as people carried banners in streets that had recently been under strict wartime control. In 1900, a Toronto cycling club posed with their bicycles when riding was still a new symbol of speed, freedom, and modern life. The horse in the photo makes the scene even better, showing the exact moment old transport and new wheels shared the road. On November 30, 1936, London's Crystal Palace lit up the night as the famous glass building was lost to fire. It had stood since the Great Exhibition era, making this photo the last glowing moment of a Victorian wonder. Winston Churchill loved bricklaying so much that he built garden walls at Chartwell and even joined the Bricklayers' Union. This photo shows the strange private side of a famous statesman, not giving speeches, but calmly placing bricks by hand. In October 1871, the Great Chicago Fire swept through the city and left whole blocks reduced to empty stone shells. From the ruins, Chicago rebuilt fast, turning one of America's worst urban disasters into the start of a modern skyline. In 1945, Paris aircraft were displayed on the Champs-Élysées for the Les Ailes de France aviation exhibition. The strange street scene shows a city just after liberation, turning war machines into public objects on one of Europe's most famous avenues. In 1917, Nicholas II's study in the Winter Palace was photographed after the imperial rooms had been broken open and scattered. The messy desk and fallen papers show the exact moment when royal power in Russia stopped looking untouchable. In 1911, American children as young as 8 worked after school in dirty oyster sheds, carrying buckets instead of books. Photos like this helped expose how normal child work once looked before stronger laws pushed childhood back toward classrooms. In 1968, the Kufulo people in Ivory Coast held a funeral ceremony with drums, masks, and tall horned headpieces. The scene shows how music and costume turned farewell into a powerful public ritual of memory and respect. Around 1910, exiled laborers stood in formation during work on the Amur Railway, one of Russia's harshest frontier projects. The photo shows how a railroad across the Far East was built not only by engineers, but also by forced labor far from home. In June 1978, Muhammad Ali and Veronica Porci visited Tashkent during an unusual Soviet honeymoon trip. The boxing legend skipped the usual luxury route and turned his honeymoon into a Cold War cultural surprise. Before the war, these Soviet Baltic Fleet sailors trained outdoors with weights, turning a simple yard into a rough-strength gym. The photo stands out because the Navy is usually shown with ships, but here its discipline is written in muscle, sun, and iron. In 1945, Red Army soldiers covered the Reichstag walls with names, cities, and short messages after reaching Berlin. One inscription read, "For Karbyshev, turning the building into a giant notebook of memory, victory, and personal loss." In December 1948, a young camp survivor reunited with the American soldier who had helped free him and later became his adoptive father. The embrace captures a rare second beginning after years of loss, turning one rescue into a family story. In this rare school photo, a young diarist smiles at her desk before her notebook became one of the most read voices of the Second World War. The quiet image feels powerful because it shows an ordinary child, not yet knowing her words, would outlive the darkness around her. In 1904, Houston's rail yards were packed with cotton bales, waiting to move across Texas and beyond. The photo shows the old cotton economy at full scale, with trains turning fields into global trade. In the 1880s, these Persian Jewish women were photographed wearing layered dress, face veils, jewelry, and traditional head coverings. The portrait is rare because it preserves a small view of Jewish life inside Qajar-era Persia, far from the usual royal and military images. In 1922, Arthur Conan Doyle met Isla Norwood, the silent film actor who played Sherlock Holmes 47 times. The meeting feels special because the creator of Holmes was sitting with one of the first screen faces of his legendary detective. Juan Pujol Garcia fooled German intelligence with an entire fake spy network in Britain during the Second World War. The wild part is that many of his agents never existed, but his false reports helped mislead Germany before the Normandy landings. In 1943, American soldiers on the Italian front knelt in the leaves for Christmas Mass with a field chaplain. The small outdoor service shows how faith and routine followed them even into the cold hills of wartime Italy. Violet and Daisy Hilton were born in Brighton in 1908 and became famous performers on both sides of the Atlantic. Their polished stage image hid a harder story because much of their early life was controlled by managers who treated them like a business. In 1991, Kuwait's desert turned into a dark horizon as oil wells burned and covered the sky with smoke. The shepherd and his flock make the photo unforgettable, showing ordinary life moving through a man-made desert of fire. In this courthouse hallway, a Florida sheriff reads the Chi Omega indictment to a notorious defendant as cameras capture the cold legal moment. The image feels tense because the man stands almost casual, while the room around him knows the case is about to become national history. In 1945, American soldiers brought nearby German civilians to a liberated camp so they could no longer look away from what had happened there. The woman covering her face makes the photo unforgettable, turning silence into a public moment of forced memory. A Swedish island girl reportedly entered a strange long sleep as a teenager and woke up decades later with memories from before it. Her case became famous because even doctors could not fully explain whether it was illness, deep care at home, or a mystery history never solved. This photo captures a United States atomic test over the Marshall Islands, where the Pacific sky briefly formed a giant white dome. The tiny clouds around it show the scale, making the test cloud look less like weather and more like a man-made island in the air. In January 1993, during the siege of Sarajevo, a local man leaned up to light a cigarette for a French United Nations soldier. The tiny gesture feels powerful because for 1 second, a city under pressure looked human again. In 1956, protesters in Budapest pulled down a giant Stalin statue during the Hungarian Revolution. Its head, lying in the street, became a powerful symbol of people breaking the image of Soviet control in public view. Near Edirne in 1912 or 1913, Bulgarian soldiers shaped snow into bears during quiet hours of the First Balkan War. The playful scene is striking because it shows young men turning a frozen front line into a brief moment of imagination. In November 1952, Cleveland's Cuyahoga River caught fire after oil and industrial waste floated on the water. The shocking detail is simple. The river was so polluted that it could burn, helping push America toward modern clean water laws. In May 1915, lifeboats from the RMS Lusitania reached Queenstown after the liner went down near Ireland in only 18 minutes. The disaster shocked the world because a luxury passenger ship suddenly became a turning point in public opinion during the First World War. In September 1938, a French reservist kissed his wife goodbye during the Sudetenland Crisis mobilization. The moment looks romantic, but it was taken during Europe's final tense weeks before peace began to collapse. In 1919, Boston police loaded stacks of seized political literature into a police ambulance during a tense year of strikes and Red Scare fears. The odd detail is the vehicle itself. An ambulance meant for people was being used to carry ideas the authorities wanted off the street. Nicoleta Nicolescu led the women's wing of Romania's Iron Guard, using camps and public rituals to organize female supporters. The unsettling part is how the photo turns radical politics into a scene of discipline, unity, and almost ordinary summer camp life. This photo shows leaders from two extremist movements meeting in America, trying to turn shared hate into political partnership. What makes it eerie is the handshake, a formal public pose built around an alliance that history now remembers as poisonous. In 1968, a New York restaurant used servers as walking menus with prices written directly on their bodies. The photo feels unreal today because it shows how casual public advertising once mixed food, nightlife, and shock value. In 1916, workers made rows of artificial legs for soldiers returning from the First World War. The workshop looks quiet, but the number of limbs on the tables shows the hidden human cost behind the front lines. In the 1920s, some dentists still used foot-powered drills, working the machine by pedal while treating patients. The setup looks strange today, but it shows how dental care was becoming modern before electric tools became common. This Turkish clipping shows Elif on the day she arrived at the Elazig Girls Institute, and again after 1 year at school. The two portraits turned one girl's clothes, posture, and language learning into a public before and after symbol of modernization. This post refers to Blondie, the German shepherd kept by the Nazi leader during his final bunker days. The disturbing detail is that even his pet became part of those last hours, showing how control reached into the smallest private moments. For The Wizard of Oz, the famous tornado was not real storm footage, but a giant muslin stocking spun by a crane and motor. The illusion worked so well that one of cinema's most famous storms was basically cloth, wire, dust, and perfect timing. In July 1942, the Japanese battleship Musashi tested its 46-centimeter main guns during sea trials near Oita. The smoke cloud shows the force of one of the largest battleships ever built, made to dominate the sea before air power changed everything. In 1979, Afghan Mujahideen watched a Soviet convoy from stone cover in the mountains of Nuristan. The photo captures the start of a long mountain struggle where local fighters used terrain as their strongest weapon. In 1991, crowds in Moscow watched the statue of Felix Dzerzhinsky being pulled down during the fall of the Soviet Union. The fallen monument became a clear street symbol that the old system was losing its power in front of everyone. In March 1945, Dmitry Baltermans photographed Soviet soldiers inside a damaged room in Breslau during the first Ukrainian front advance. The title Tchaikovsky makes the scene feel unreal, as if music and calm briefly appeared among broken walls. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most and for what reason?